Laura stood on the bridge of the horizon and watched the stars stretch in lines as the ship dropped out of fat and light trail. The view that greeted her took her breath away. A massive space station floated before them, larger than any structure humanity had ever built. It glowed with soft blue and gold lights, and hundreds of ships moved around it like insects around a hive. This was Prime, the heart of the Galactic Confederation, and humanity had finally arrived. Turned to her crew. They were all staring at the station with wide eyes and open mouths. She understood how they felt. 3 months ago, humanity had achieved fat and light travel. 2 months ago, they had received a message from deep space inviting them to join a community of intelligent species. 1 month ago, Laura had been chosen to lead the first diplomatic mission. Now here she stood, about to represent all of Earth creatures from across the galaxy. Park sat at the weapons console, his fingers resting lightly on controls that Laura hoped he would never need to use. Was young but brilliant, the best weapons officer in the fleet. He caught Laura looking at him and gave her a small nod. They both knew that the Horizon was not just a diplomatic vessel. It carried enough firepower to level a small city. Earth had insisted on sending an armed ship. Humanity had learned through centuries of war that showing up unarmed often invited trouble. His crowd through the communication system. It was strange and musical, clearly translated by computer. The voice welcomed the human-veiled Prime and provided dying instruction. Laura acknowledged the message and guided the Horizon toward the designated bay. As they approached, she noticed something odd about the other ships around the station. They were beautiful and elegant, with smooth curves and glowing engines, but none of them had visible weapons. Gun ports, no middle tubes, no armor plating. They looked like works of art rather than functional spacecraft. Horizon settled into its dying bay with a gentle thump. Laura straightened her uniform and walked to the airlock with her small team. Came with her, along with Cole, their communications officer, and Danny, the chief engineer. They had been chosen because they were the best at their jobs and because they could keep calm under pressure. Laura hoped the same quality would not be tested today. Going to reveal a welcoming party of aliens. Laura had seen images during the journey here, but seeing them in person was different. The leader of the group was a tall creature that resembled an insect standing upright. He had 4 arms, large compound eyes, and wings folded against his back. His body was covered in plates of green and gold. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked together in a pattern that the translator turned into words. Them warmly and expressed pleasure at meeting the species to join the galactic community. He explained that the Confederation was an alliance of 47 species that had maintained peace and cooperation for 12,000 years. Laura smiled and thanked him for the welcome. She tried not to show her amazement at the number. 12,000 years. Humanity had barely managed to go a few decades without a major war. The party led them through the station. Everything was clean and bright and peaceful. Beings of all shapes and sizes walked past them, some humanoid, some completely alien. A few stopped to stare at the humans with curiosity, explained that new species joining the Confederation was rare and always caused excitement. Humanity would be studied and celebrated. Laura felt like an animal in a zoo, but she kept her diplomatic smile in place. A large chamber where more officials waited. One of them was High Counselor Myra, the leader of the entire Confederation. She was shorter than Laura had expected, resembling a male covered in silver fur with large dark eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Myra welcomed them with genuine warmth and spoke of the great things humanity could contribute to the Confederation. Laura noticed that the counselor's tone was kind but slightly condescending, like an adult speaking to a clever child. Humanity was clearly seen as primitive, a young species that had much to learn. Molly continued with speeches and introduction. Laura played her part perfectly, expressing gratitude and hope for future cooperation, but her mind kept returning to the ships outside. She leaned toward and whispered her observation about the lack of weapons. Nodded and said he had noticed the same thing. The ships were completely unarmed. Even the station itself had no defensive systems that he could detect. Breaking the ceremony, Laura asked about this. The alien seemed confused by the question at first. Then understanding crossed his face and he explained. The Confederation had banned all warfare 8,000 years ago. The member species had agreed that violence was primitive and unnecessary. They had destroyed their weapons and erased all knowledge of how to make them. War was a thing of the distant past, studied by historians but never practiced. Felt a chill run down her spine. She exchanged a look with an entire galaxy that had forgotten how to fight. It sounded like paradise, but something about it made her uneasy. Humanity had dreamed of such peace for centuries but had never achieved it. There was always another war, another conflict, another reason to build better weapons. Ceremony resumed, and the technician began a routine scan of the horizon to add it to the stage registry. Laura did not think anything of it until the technician made a strange sound and called over. The two aliens stared at the scanner readout with expressions that Laura could not read, then turned to her with what might have been confusion. Asked what the objects inside her ship were. The scanner had detected dense metal projectiles, chemical propellants, and energy systems of unknown purpose. Laura realized what had happened. The scanner had found the weapon. She tried to explain but did not seem to understand. He had never seen anything like them. The concept of a weapon designed to destroy other ships was foreign to him. Laura could find the right words. An alarm began to sound throughout the station. Red lights flashed and voices called out in a dozen languages. Myra rushed to console, and her silver fur stood on end with alarm. She announced that an unknown fleet had been detected entering Confederation space. The ships were large and numerous and heading straight for Prime. Watched the alien faces around her fill with fear. These peaceful beings had no idea what to do. They had forgotten how to defend themselves, and now something was coming for them. And center of Prime was in chaos. Dozens of alien officials rushed between consoles, speaking in earned tones that the translator struggled to keep up with. Holographic displays showed the approaching fleet as a cluster of red dots moving steadily toward the station. Laura counted 30 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They moved in perfect formation like predators closing in on prey. Counselor Myers stood at the center of the room, trying to maintain calm while her silver fur rippled with obvious distress. She called for order and asked Chief Analyst to explain what they were facing. It was unlike any being Laura had seen. His body appeared to be made of living crystal, and light refracted through him in beautiful patterns. But there was nothing beautiful about the information he shared. Explained that the approaching ship belonged to the... Laura did not recognize the name, but the reaction of everyone else in the room told her enough. Fear spread across faces of all shapes and sizes. Some of the officials began to tremble. One small creature fainted and had to be carried away. The members of the Confederation 9,000 years ago continued. They were a reptilian species known for their aggressive nature and love of conflict. When the Confederation voted to ban all warfare and destroy all weapons, they refused. They believed that strength and violence were necessary parts of life. Rather than submit to what they called weakness, they left the Confederation and disappeared into the unexplored regions of the galaxy. I asked the question that everyone was thinking. What did they want after all this time? Crystal body flickered with dark color as he answered. They had spent 9,000 years preparing. They had built weapons and ships and trained for war while the Confederation forgot that such things existed. Now they had returned to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Everything. Felt stepped closer to her. He whispered that 30 ships of that size could carry millions of soldiers. If they intended to invade, there would be nothing to stop them. Laura nodded grimly. She had already reached the same conclusion. Myron asked what defense they had. The council's response made Laura's heart sink. They had none. The Confederation had no military, no weapons, no soldiers, no ship designed for combat. They had lived in peace for so long that they had erased all knowledge of how to make war. Even the historical records had been deliberately destroyed to prevent future generations from being corrupted by violent ideas. Fell silent. Laura looked around at the alien faces and saw despair taking hold. These beings had built an incredible civilization. They had achieved things that humanity could only dream of, but they had made themselves helpless. They had removed the thorns from their own roses and now had nothing to protect themselves with. Turned to the assembled officials and asked if anyone had any ideas. No one spoke. What could they say? You could not negotiate with an enemy that wanted everything. You could not run from a threat that controlled the only routes out of the system, and you could not fight without weapons or the knowledge of how to use them. Made a decision. She stepped forward and addressed Meyer directly. The counselor looked at her with surprise. In the chaos, everyone had forgotten about the human visitors. Laura said that she might be able to help. Meyer asked how. What could a single primitive species do against the fleet? Explained that humanity had never stopped making war. Throughout their entire history, humans had fought each other. They had developed weapons of terrible power and learned how to use them with deadly efficiency. It was not something they were proud of, but it was the truth. The Horizon was not just a diplomatic vessel. It was a warship carrying weapons that could destroy other spacecraft. Room erupted in confused murmurs. Many of the aliens did not understand what Laura was saying. The concept of a weapon designed to destroy ships was too foreign for them to grasp quickly. Asked Laura to clarify. She asked to help explain. Forward and began to describe what the Horizon carried. He spoke slowly and used simple terms. The ship had that fired solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds. The impact of these projectiles could punch through thick metal like a finger through wet paper. They had mills that could track targets and explode with enough force to vaporize small moons. They had energy weapons that could cut through hulls with concentrated beams of light. Aliens listened with growing horror and fascination. Some covered their sensory organs as if it was describing something obscene. Others leaned forward, desperate to understand. Myra asked why any species would create such terrible things. Laura answered honestly. Humans created them to kill each other. When one group developed a new weapon, their enemies developed a better one. This cycle had continued for thousands of years. Humans had never known true peace. They had always been preparing for the next war. The mission came through from the fleet. Commander appeared on the main display. He was a massive reptilian creature with scales like black armor and eyes that burned with cruel intelligence. His voice was harsh and mocking as he delivered his message. The Confederation would surrender immediately. Any resistance would result in total destruction. The weak had no place in the galaxy he intended to build. I tried to respond to negotiate to find some peaceful solution. Laughed at her. He said that the Confederation had made itself prey. Prey did not negotiate with predators. The transmission ended. Looked at? He was already calculating in his head. She could see it in his eyes. One human warship against 30 vessels. The odds were impossible, but was thinking about something else. He was thinking about what they could do to an enemy that had never faced real opposition. An enemy that had developed weapons without ever testing them against an opponent who could fight back. Predators, but they had only hunted creatures that could not bite back. They were about to discover that humans were very different. Stood in the communication room of Prime and waited for the connection to Earth to establish. The signal had to travel across vast distances, bouncing through relay stations that humanity had only recently learned to use. Every second felt like an hour. Behind her, monitored the fleet's approach. They had 3 days before the enemy arrived. And flickered and Admiral Victor appeared. He was a weathered man with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. Laura had served under him years ago and knew him to be cautious but decisive. She quickly explained the situation. An alien fleet was coming to destroy a peaceful civilization. The Horizon was the only armed vessel in the system. Earth's response would determine whether humanity entered the galactic stage as heroes or stood by while billions died. Listened without interrupting. When Laura finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he asked how many ships they had. Laura told him 32, nodded slowly and said that Earth had sent a fleet to help. 20 warships fully armed and ready for combat. But there was a problem. Even at maximum speed, the fleet would take 2 weeks to arrive. Felt her stomach drop. 2 weeks. It would reach Prime in 3 days. By the time Earth's fleet arrived, it would all be over. Millions of innocent beings would be dead or enslaved. The Confederation would fall. And humanity's first impression on the galactic community would be that they stood by and did nothing. Her decision before she fully realized it. The Horizon would stay and fight. Admiral argued against it. 1 ship against 32 was suicide. Laura agreed that the odds were terrible, but she explained what had told her. They had developed weapons in isolation. They had never faced an enemy that could fight back. Their shields and armor were designed based on theory, not experience. Human weapons were different. Human weapons had been tested in real combat for centuries. Every missile and every had been refined through actual warfare. Considered this for a moment. Then he asked what Laura needed. She requested that he send the fleet at maximum speed. If the Horizon could hold the off long enough, reinforcements might arrive before the end. It was a thin hope, but it was better than nothing. Agreed and wished her luck. The connection ended. Turned to the main council chamber where Mara and the other affiliate waited. She told them her plan. The Horizon would engage the fleet and delay their advance as long as possible. During this time, the Confederation needed to evacuate as many civilians from Prime as they could. Send them to distant colonies, hide them in unexplored systems, do whatever it took to save lives. Stared at Laura with those large dark eyes. She asked why humanity would do this. They had only just met. The Confederation had done nothing to earn such sacrifice. Laura thought about how to answer. She could have talked about duty or honor or the hope of future alliance, but she decided to be honest. That humans knew what it felt like to be conquered. Throughout their history, stronger nations had invaded weaker ones. The strong had enslaved the weak and destroyed entire cultures. Humanity had done terrible things to itself, but they had also learned something from all that suffering. They learned that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. They learned that standing by while innocents died was not really living at all. So Chamber was silent, then stepped forward and bowed deeply to Laura. He said that he had underestimated humanity. He had thought them primitive and violent. Now he understood that their violence had a purpose. It existed to protect those who could not protect themselves. Accepted his words with a simple nod. There would be time for deeper conversations later, assuming any of them survived. 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Cole worked with the Confederation's communication systems to establish a network that could track the battle in real time. Dane pushed the Horizon's engines and weapons to their absolute limits, making repairs and adjustments that would squeeze every possible advantage from the ship. Ran simulations constantly, trying to find tactics that might work against such overwhelming numbers. Briefed her crew on what they were about to attempt. She did not sugarcoat the situation. The odds of survival were very low. Anyone who wanted to stay behind on the station could do so without shame. Not a single person took the offer. They were all scared, but they were also determined. This was what they had trained for. This was what it meant to be human. The morning of the third day, the fleet appeared on cinders. 32 massive warships dropped out of faster than light travel and began their approach toward Prime. Commander sent another transmission, this time demanding the immediate surrender of all Confederation assets and personnel. He promised that resistance would be punished severely. Took the communication console and responded personally. She identified herself as Captain Laura of the Earth Veil Horizon. She informed that Prime was under human protection. Any ship that attempted to attack the station would be destroyed. She suggested that he turn his fleet around and go home. He asked what one tiny ship could possibly do against his armada. Laura smiled coldly and told him that he was about to find out. She ended the transmission and turned to her crew. That weapons were ready, confirmed that the communication network was active, and the entire Confederation would witness what was about to happen. Dane said the engines were purring like satisfied cats. Settled into her captain's chair and gave the order. The Horizon undocked from Prime and moved to intercept the fleet, one ship against 32. The Galaxy watched and held its breath. Horizon raced through the darkness of space toward the approaching fleet. On the bridge, every crew member sat at their station with focused determination. Laura watched the tactical display as the distance between them and the enemy decreased. 32 red dots against one blue dot. The image would have been almost funny if the stakes were not so high. Not that they were entering weapon range. His voice was steady despite the improbable odds. Laura gave the order to fire, pressed the controls, and the Horizon shuddered as it launched their first salvo. A tungsten projectile screamed across space at a speed that was difficult to comprehend. They covered the distance to the lead ship in seconds. Impact was devastating. The projectiles punched through the enemy ship's shields as if they did not exist. They tore through the hull and continued through the other side, leaving massive holes in their wake. The vessel broke apart in a shower of debris and flame. Laura heard gasps from the communication channel. The entire Confederation was watching, and they had just witnessed something they never imagined possible. He screamed orders to his fleet. The ship began to scatter and return fire. Enemy beams lanced across space toward the Horizon. Laura ordered evasive maneuvers, and the ship rolled and twisted through the incoming fire. Human pilots had been dying weapons since the invention of the bow and arrow. The instinct was ancient and refined through countless generations of warfare. Again and again, each salvo found its target with mechanical precision. The shields were designed to deflect energy weapons because that was what they themselves used. They had never considered that someone might simply throw lumps of metal at incredible speeds. The shields did nothing. Ship after ship exploded under the relentless barrage. To adapt, they changed their formation and concentrated their fire on the Horizon. The human ship was fast and agile, but it could not dodge everything. An energy beam struck the port side, and alarms screamed throughout the bridge, reported damage to several compartments. Danny was already running to coordinate repairs. Push forward instead of retreating. She knew that hesitation would get them killed faster than aggression. The Horizon dove into the heart of the formation, weapons blazing in all directions. At close range, the enemy ships struggled to target her without hitting each other. Their energy beams sliced through empty space or struck their own allies. Missiles for the first time. The warheads tracked their targets with cold electronic intelligence. They had no countermeasure because they did not know such weapon existed. The missiles struck 3 ships simultaneously, and the explosion lit up the void like new stars being born. Communication channel, Laura could hear the disbelief of the watching Confederation. They kept repeating the same question in different ways. How was it possible? How could one small ship cause such destruction? They had no frame of reference for what they were seeing. Warfare was supposed to be ancient history, a shameful chapter that civilized beings had moved beyond. Yet here it was, brutal and effective and terrifying beautiful. Furious, he screamed at his captain to destroy the human vessel at any cost. The closed in from all sides, sacrificing tactical advantage for overwhelming number. The Horizon was hit again and again. Hull breaches opened on multiple decks. Fires broke out in the engine room. Dane shared damage reports while his team fought to keep the ship functioning. Felt the deck shudder beneath her feet. They were taking too much punishment. The Horizon was tough, but she was not invincible. They had destroyed 19 enemy ships in the past hour, but 13 remained, and those 13 were learning. They had begun to anticipate the human tactics and adjust their attacks accordingly. But that they were running low on ammunition. The missiles were almost gone. Energy reserves were dropping. Laura looked at the tactical display and made a hard calculation. They could not win this fight, but they could make the pay such a terrible price that they would think twice before continuing. Ordered to target the largest remaining ship, the one that their sensors indicated was flagship. Every weapon they had left would focus on that single target. If they had killed the enemy commander, they might lose their will to fight. Ryan turned toward the flagship and accelerated. Enemy beams struck them from every direction. The ship groaned in protest as systems failed one after another, lost communication with the rear sections of the vessel. Danny reported that the engines were about to give out, but they kept going. But everything they had, rounds, the last missile, even the emergency flares were launched as improvised weapons. The barrage struck flagship with devastating force. The massive ship shuddered and began to break apart. Laura saw escape pods launching from its hull before it exploded in a brilliant flash. The effort had cost them dearly. The Horizon was crippled, engines dead, weapons empty, life support failing on half the decks. They drifted through space surrounded by the wreckage of destroyed ships, both human and fighting ships gathered at a safe distance. Laura expected them to close in and finish the job. The Horizon could not run and could not fight. They were helpless. They did not attack. Laura watched in surprise as the remaining 12 ships turned away from Prime. They activated their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the darkness. They were retreating. Slumped in her chair as the realization hit her. They had won. One ship against 32, and they had won. The Confederation was safe. Millions of lives had been saved. He appeared on the bridge with burns on his face and a smile on his lips. He reported that they were not going to explode anytime soon, laughed weakly and said that was good because he was too tired to evacuate, announced that the Confederation was sending rescue vessel. Looked at her exhausted crew and felt a pride deeper than any she had known. They had done the impossible, and the galaxy would never forget it. It had passed since the Battle of Prime. Laura stood on the observation deck of the station and watched the Earth fleet arrive. 20 warships dropped out of fat than light travel in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. Admiral Victor had pushed his ship beyond their limits to get here as fast as possible. He was too late for the battle, but right on time for what came next. Arm was still in a medical device that the Confederation doctors had provided. Her injuries from the battle were healing quick thanks to alien medicine, far more advanced than anything on Earth. Most of her crew had similar devices attached to various body parts. Dane's burns were almost completely gone, had a device wrapped around his ribs where a falling beam had struck him during the fight. Eisen flowed near the station, surrounded by repaired drones and grateful Confederation engineers. They had taken apart every weapon system and engine component, not to kite them but to understand. For the first time in 8,000 years, the peaceful beings of the Confederation were learning about war. The knowledge made many of them uncomfortable, but they recognized its necessity. Arrived on the station within hours of his fleet's appearance. Lore met him at the docking bay and was surprised when he pulled her into a firm hug. Was not known for emotional displays. He stepped back and looked at her with something like wonder in his old eyes. He said that what she had done was impossible. Military analysts back on Earth were still trying to understand how the Horizon had survived, let alone one. Smiled tiredly and said it was mostly luck, shook his head. Luck might explain one destroyed ship. It did not explain 19. They had faced something they never expected, something that no one in the galaxy expected. They had faced humans. Days were filled with meetings and negotiations. Myra hosted a formal ceremony to honor the crew of the Horizon. Medals were created specifically for the occasion since the Confederation had never needed military honors before. Laura accepted hers with quiet dignity. She noticed that many aliens in the audience looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She understood. They were grateful to be alive, but they were also realizing what humanity was capable of. Discussions happened in private rooms away from the crowds. Myra met with Admiral and Laura to discuss the future. They were defeated but not destroyed. They had retreated to lick their wounds and would eventually return. Other threats might exist beyond the explored regions of space. The Confederation needed protection, and only humanity could provide it. Out of proposal, humanity would establish a military presence in Confederation space. Human warships would patrol the borders and respond to threats. In exchange, the Confederation would share their advanced technology and accept Earth as a full member of the Alliance. It was a partnership built on complementary strengths. The Confederation had knowledge and resources. Humanity had the one thing they lacked, the willingness and ability to fight. Accepted the proposal with some conditions. Human military actions would require Confederation approval. Weapons of mass destruction would not be used against civilian targets, and humanity would work to eventually train other species in defense so that the burden would not fall on one people forever. Agreed to everything. He was a soldier, not a conqueror. He wanted peace as much as anyone. He simply understood that peace sometimes required a strong hand to protect. The official meeting ended, approached Laura. He asked if they could speak privately. They walked together to a quiet garden on the station where alien plants grew in strange and beautiful patterns. The tall was silent for a long moment before he spoke. Asked Laura a question that had been troubling him. Why did humanity never abandon weapons like other species did? Almost every civilization in the galaxy had gone through a violent phase in their development, but eventually they moved past it. They realized that cooperation was more efficient than conflict. They chose peace and dismantled their war machines. Why were humans different? Thought carefully before answering. She said that humans had tried many times to achieve lasting peace. After every terrible war, they swore never to fight again. They signed treaties and formed alliances and promised themselves that the killing was over, but it never lasted. Someone always broke the peace. Someone always found a reason to pick up weapons again. Lore continued, humans realized something important. Peace was not the narrow state of the universe. Peace was precious and fragile and needed to be protected. You could not simply declare peace and expect it to sustain itself. You had to be willing to defend it. You had to show potential aggressors that breaking the peace would cost them dearly. Weapons were not the opposite of peace. They were the guardians of it. Did this for a long time. Then he said something that surprised Laura. He said that perhaps the Confederation had made a mistake 8,000 years ago. They had achieved peace by forgetting how to fight, but in doing so they had made themselves vulnerable. When they returned, they had no way to protect the civilization they had built. If not for humanity, everything would have been lost. Put her hand on his shoulder, careful of his delicate wings. She told him that what was done was done. The past could not be changed, but the future was still being written. Humans and the Confederation could work together to build something better, a galaxy where peace was valued and protected, where the innocent did not have to fear those who chose violence. Looked out at the stars beyond the garden window, came to stand beside her. He asked what she was thinking about. Laura said she was wondering what else was out there. There were just one threat. The galaxy was vast and full of unknown dangers. Humanity had stepped onto a much larger stage, and the play was just beginning. Thoughtfully, he said he hoped that whoever else was out there would learn the lesson they had learned. The galaxy was unprepared for the strength of human weapons, but more than that, the galaxy was unprepared for what humans would do to protect those they cared about. Smiled. Whoever came next, humanity would face it together. They always had, and now they had new friends to stand beside them. Stars waved, bright and full of possibility.